Please join me in welcoming our speaker today and one of Shady Side's preeminent graduates, David McCullough.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I can't imagine anything that could happen that would please me more or give me a feeling of being honored than to come back to this kind of occasion at Shady Side and to be introduced in such generous fashion by none other than Walter Jones. Walter Jones is a treasure, as we all know, and none of us who were his students can ever adequately say thank you. But thank you, Walter, very much. I love this school, and I love my hometown of Pittsburgh. And I have sometimes been asked how it is that I figure out a way to work Pittsburgh into all my books. And I try to explain, I'm not working Pittsburgh into my books. Pittsburgh is part of the American story. And every time I come back, I'm reminded of what a fascinating and infinitely important city it is. And I congratulate all of you, not just for your part in the life of this school, but your part in the life of this wonderful city. A short while ago, after giving a talk at a college in California, I was asked the following question. Aside from Harry Truman and John Adams, how many other American presidents have you interviewed? Now, we Americans love the new. The new world has always been known for the new. We greet each other by saying, "What's new?" Nobody says, "What's old?" And yes, I am old, and yes, I'm in the olden days business. And I love the old. I love old stories. I love old songs. I love old automobiles. I love old friends. I have a 1940 Royal Standard typewriter, a very old manual typewriter, upon which I have written everything I've ever had published, and there's nothing wrong with it, and I love it. And I love good old Shady Side. Now, I entered the 8th grade, the second form of Shady Side, in the long ago year of 1946. It was September. I was 13. The Second World War had ended only the year before, and Harry Truman was president, as he would be through all of my 5 years at Shady Side. Eventually, our class would number about 60 students. The tuition, I believe, was $500. It was a different time, a different world. Erdman Harris was the headmaster, and Dr. Harris, in his snappy dove-colored vests, was an impressive presence, an ordained minister, an engaging speaker, a man of many talents whose good times at the piano keyboard, playing his own lively compositions, which he wrote both words and music, added much to the atmosphere of the school. Some of us here today still know the words to one song in particular. It goes like this. When the 5 o'clock bell goes ding, 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 it's the bell that sounds for us. All the day boys swish their Coca-Colas down and rush for the day boy bus. Did I say one? There's three of them, and they're painted just the color of the sunset. And the big black letters on the side are the ones that bring our joy and pride. For the driver takes us for a ride to Shady Side. As day boys, we had the full 5-day life of the school. But we also had that of home and the city. Home each night after school, the city, and our own social life, so to speak, on the weekends. I was one of 4 brothers, and dinner began at the dining room table promptly at 6:30 when our father, regular as clockwork, arrived home from the office. And the conversation at the table got going almost from the moment we sat down. We'd talk about my father's day, or old Pittsburgh stories of fires and floods and labor fights, or tales of eccentric relatives, which I liked best of all, or the politics of the moment, which interested me more and more. The night of the '48 election, I remember keeping to my homework with one ear, tuned to the radio with the other, not wanting to miss any of it. As the night dragged on and there was still no decision, I finally gave up and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up, called into my father, who was shaving. "Dad, who won?" "Truman." 30 years later or so, I went back home to visit my father, and he started in lamenting how the country and the world were all going to hell. It was a refrain I had heard most of my life. But then he sighed and said, "Too bad old Harry isn't still in the White House." I had to remind him gently that he had not always felt that way. The weekends at home and in and about the city almost also meant going to ball games at Forbes Field or to the movies in East Liberty or downtown, all on our own. And to the theater, the real thing, at the Nixon. I saw Streetcar Named Desire with Marlon Brando and Harvey with Frank Fay, which to me was pure magic. My old friend and classmate, Bill Hill, and I were reminiscing the other afternoon about a night during our senior year when a bunch of us went over to the south side to a roadhouse called Johnny Green's, where we heard Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald live and went backstage between sessions to shake their hands. Now that was living. And yes, we went to the bars and the burlesque house, the legendary casino, the Big C. We had freedom, unimaginable freedom by today's terms, and including, importantly, the freedom to do dumb things, to make mistakes, and we did, you may be sure. Helicopter parenting was still far in the future, but as I said, it was a different time, a different world. I don't recall my father ever coming to a sports event in which I was taking part, or any other fathers on hand, except perhaps for a Saturday game. It never occurred to us that they would be there. They had jobs to do, after all. Sports at Shady Side then were immensely important, and the star athletes were the big men on campus. There was Dick Pivorato, who was several classes ahead of us. The greatest heroes were always several classes ahead of us. All the Lynch brothers were terrific athletes, and the Heppenstalls. Steve Swensrud in our class, the class of 1951, was a star in every sport. But the extracurricular part of school life counted tremendously too, and it was a strong, important part of our education. It was never treated as peripheral, never perceived as the parsley around the main dish. It was part of the main dish. I thought so at the time and appreciate even more in retrospect that the athletes took part in the extracurricular activities no less than the others. Tom Warner, the captain of the football team, was a very good artist. Steve Swensrud was one of the editors and contributors to the literary magazine, The Algerian. Joe Reineman was an avid photographer. Ned Heppenstall loved music. Bill Hill was a skilled fly fisherman, which is, let us not forget, Walter, an art form unto itself. Pete McCants played a mean game of pool, another of the fine arts. Just about everyone who could carry a tune sang in the Glee Club under the direction of Mr. Howard. And the cast of the school's annual stage production was always traditionally a good mix of boys of all ages, sizes, and abilities. Though if I remember correctly, Ted Sheets wound up in the lead parts because he was hands down the handsomest of us. I did, however, once land a big part in a spoof of a 19th century melodrama. I played the hero, Jack Dalton. My big show-stopping line was so: "You may sneer, but beneath this flannel shirt there beats an honest heart." My mother loved it. What might have been done differently or better, judging in hindsight? Well, to begin with, of course, there were no girls. That clearly was the most regrettable flaw in our minds. And there were no African Americans. In fact, the only African American I can remember was Mr. Jackson, the greatly beloved custodian of the gym. And then there were disproportionately few Jewish students. There were no students of Polish or Ukrainian or Croatian background. It was hardly a representative cross-section of Pittsburgh. But then we knew something about that by just being part of Pittsburgh ourselves, just riding the streetcars and seeing people reading newspapers in other languages or hearing them talk. Foreign language instruction in the classroom, alas, was focused almost entirely on reading, vocabulary, and the everlasting conjugating of verbs. In French, we seldom ever were called on to say anything in the language, never put to the test in conversation in French. Looking back, I wish there had been a few field trips to the Carnegie Museum or the Pittsburgh Symphony, or that we've been led on a visit to the Carnegie Library with someone on the faculty who could have given us an idea of the infinite, wondrous possibilities of a great library. But then the weekends offered ample chance to go to the museums and the library on our own steam. And in our household, because of my oldest brother, Hax, and his love of music, Saturday afternoon broadcasts of the Metropolitan Opera were heard at full blast, like it or not. And Shady Side's own library, as run by the wonderful Betsy Botsett, was a treasure house of the kind any school would be proud to claim. Many were the books I read because Mrs. Botsett recommended them. There was no program that encouraged community services, and I think that part of being a good citizen ought to dawn on one and take hold at that stage in life. Were we sufficiently aware of how the other half lived? No, we were not. Were we spoiled? Somewhat, but not greatly. Nor was snobbery tolerated, at school or at home. Indeed, I don't remember ever encountering a certifiable snob until I went east to college. Were we well prepared for college, for that next big step in our education by this small hometown preparatory school? Yes, indeed, very well prepared. Speaking from my own experience, I can say that I found my first year at Yale something of a disappointment in that it was less stimulating intellectually than my senior year at Shady Side had been. And certainly I and those of my Shady Side classmates who also went to Yale were able to keep pace with the work quite as well as any of those from the big, better-known Eastern prep schools. Then as now, Shady Side had the great appeal of its beautiful setting. The red brick buildings were no less handsome than today. The grounds were always superbly cared for. The facilities for athletes were as good as any we'd ever seen. There was even a golf course. The swimming pool came later, the hockey rink too. Nor was there anything at all, even remotely, like this magnificent Hillman Center for the Performing Arts, which in itself seems to me emblematic of that very point that the arts are part of it all, essential to it all. Here it is at the very center of the campus. There was, besides, then as now, a strong, proud feeling of continuity, of fathers and brothers who had gone to Shady Side before us. My own father was in the class of 1918. But what mattered above all, far above all, were the friendships and the teachers. The friends made at that particular time in life are, as we all know, like no other friends. 40 years or more can go by with little or no contact with them. Yet once again together, after 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, it's as though nothing has greatly intervened. The talk and the memories, the self-same personalities, all kick into gear. Excuse me. As for teachers, I have come to the conclusion that there are no more important members of our society, that no one's work counts for more in the long run than that of our teachers, and that their capacity to instill the love of learning, not to say the old bedrock verities, is infinite. And how blessed we were in my time at Shady Side with perfectly marvelous teachers. They're still with me. I remember so much that they said. Some of it still shapes my outlook, my approach to life, my approach to my work. I've never forgotten, for example, Bob Abercrombie, who taught the American history course for seniors, saying that what people believe to be true is often more important than what is true. Lowell Innes, the ultimate teacher of English literature and writing, said again and again as a guide to writing, "Don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me someone was a mean old miser, show him being a mean old miser." As words to the wise go about writing, that's pure gold. And I remember the legendary Cap Palmer, the director of athletics, in his efforts to make a high hurdler out of me, saying time after time, "Take the hurdles as they come." How much wiser can advice get than that? Nor have I forgotten the blow it was missing a question on my first ever quiz in second form after only a few weeks. It was in history, and Walter Jones was the teacher. Who was the builder of the Suez Canal? I had no idea. If I'd read the name Ferdinand de Lesseps in what I was supposed to study, it had gone entirely out of my mind. So I've wondered since, Walter, if maybe I have you to thank for my taking up the story of de Lesseps in my book on the Panama Canal. And what a great deal of lasting value we read under the guidance of our teachers. The classic 2-volume History of the United States by Morrison and Commager, a college-level text. Only Yesterday by Frederick Lewis Allen, in which the story of the 1920s is written with life and immediacy. And such great novels as Drums and Green Mansions and Ethan Frome and Shakespeare and no end of poetry. I remember the thrill of reading Langston Hughes for the first time, and Gray's elegy in a country courtyard, some of which I memorized. Let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. I subsequently learned that that was one of Abraham Lincoln's favorite poems. I loved the reading, and I loved Lowell Innes and the other superb English teacher, Carl Cochran. We all did. Nor can I remember either of them or Walter Jones ever reprimanding or punishing any of us. They didn't have to, for the simple, obvious reason that the last thing any of us would ever wish to do was to let them down. The closest I ever had to a stern direction from Mr. Innes happened after I returned from a spring vacation to Charlottesville and told Mr. Innes that I was thinking now I might go to the University of Virginia. He looked me in the eye, put his finger up to my chest, and said in that never-to-be-forgotten Maine accent, "You're going to Yale, McCullough, and I don't want to hear any more about it." Mr. Innes, I should add, went to Yale. Carl Cochran, in addition to English, taught painting and drawing, and 1 year a course in the history of art. And as I loved to paint and draw, I spent all the time I could working with Mr. Cochran, who also guided production of the yearbook and worked with the most wonderful spirit and imagination in helping us in the elaborate decorations for our senior prom. He was a jewel of a human being and remained a friend long afterward. I feel it no exaggeration to say I loved the entire time at Shady Side. In truth, though, I could never have said so at the time. You didn't say that sort of thing. I loved every day here, in all seasons. Every year, in the last weeks of summer, I couldn't wait to go back, to see my friends and get going again. I still think of early September as the true beginning of the new year. I know now how very lucky we were in so many ways, we who were students then. It was at Shady Side that the love of learning took hold. And may it ever be so for all who are lucky enough to be part of this school, now and for a very long time to come. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks so much.